Hi guys, it's Nat here. Hope you're all doing well. I am on for my creative team project for Helmar for the month of July. So for this month, I'm going to try making a tunnel book. Now I have done one previously using an old book, which I'll link down below in case you want to have a look. So I want to do something in a similar vein, although I am changing a few of the things that I did in the last one. So I've grabbed this book. I'm hoping it will be all right. I will soon find out. I think I used pages that were a lot thicker last time, which might have worked better, but we will see. So I'll give it a go with this one, and if it's not working the way I want it to, I will change books. So I just made sure to grab a hardcover book where the pages, the signatures are sewn in. Better just double check that. Yeah, they look like they're sewn in. Not that that probably really matters. You could do it with ones that are glued in, but this is going to be a lot easier for me to take the book block out and to take the signatures apart. Now, in the last tunnel book I left the book block in and did it. With this one, I want to try something different. I'm going to take it out, which should make things a little bit easier, hopefully. So we will get on with it and we will see what we can do. I've got to take my book block out, separate it from the cover. And I learnt this trick from watching Tracy Fox. I put a bit of chipboard down in between the book pages and the spine there of the cover, just so I don't cut through the spine. And I'm just finding about centre of the book and running my knife down to separate the pages there. Usually I take my book blocks out from cutting, just inside the front and the back of the cover, and it's quite easy to cut through the spine that way, which I'm doing here, but it's a lot easier to do it and safer to do it once you've cut the middle like that. You can pull them away from the cover a bit more and see where you're cutting better. Once I've got the book block out, I just clean up the spine part of it a bit, remove some of the paper and glue from it, and I continue doing that through the process just to get it cleaned off a bit. So what I want to do is divide the book block into about 8 separate sections. These will be the tiers for my tunnel book. So all the pages in a book are usually in groups, which are called signatures, and I want to separate about 3 or 4 of the signatures from the book for each of my group of pages there. So it's quite easy to see the signatures when you look at the back of the book like this. You can see the separate groups. So I just want a sort of even section for each of my little blocks here. You don't have to be too fussy though. I'm just going down and cutting the threads that tie them all together. And removing some of the glue and cutting off any threads that stick out. Next, I'm measuring where I want to cut the top book block that I'll be using for my first tier. So this will have the biggest window in it, and then the windows will go down in size as we go. So I'm just measuring, I don't know, about a centimetre and a half from the top and bottom of the page. About a centimetre there from that side that I'm doing now. sort of cutting the text out really of this first one to create my window. Rolling lines so that I get a nice sort of even rectangle shape. Then I use a steel ruler and my box cutter there. I start gently and I don't apply too much pressure for the first few pages because if I do I might pull the pages and rip them. But once I start cutting it nicely I can go a bit heavier until I get through the whole block. So I'll do that around the whole rectangle shape. Of course, you never manage to cut the corners all the way through when you do this sort of thing, so you have to be patient afterwards and just recut the corners until you can pull all your pages out. And don't throw away the pages because I'll be using some of them as well. Same with the cover, we'll be using that for this project. So as you can see, I just go back in with the cutter to loosen the pages in the corners where they're stuck. Sometimes it's just a little bit and you can just wriggle a bit and pull them out. And don't worry if you do rip like the top page or whatever, you can just pull a couple of pages off if you need to until you get to a neater page. So I found my first page a little bit rough, so I just pulled that off. So then I put that on top of the next block of pages that I want. And I grab my pencil and I just eyeball sort of how far in at the corners I want my next window to start. Put a little dot. And then I grab my ruler and I do measure one of the dots, and then I measure the other one up that side just to make sure that they're sort of in evenly, so it's going to be a nice sort of straight rectangle hopefully. And I'll repeat that process around the 4 sides, just measuring to make sure they're about even, and then rule the lines so that I know where to cut. And then repeat the process over and over again for all the book blocks except for one. I think I ended up cutting 6 or 7. I know I took one block out because I decided I didn't need an extra block. The last block you don't want to cut a window in, which you will see why afterwards when I stack them all together. But that is how I make my tiers, and it's up to you how many tiers you want and how big you want all the windows depending on what pictures you want to put in them and that. So once I've drawn the rectangle, I put that top one over the top again just to make sure I have it where I want it. Now I want to stick my pages together. Now this is time consuming. There would be easier ways to do it. You don't even really necessarily need to do it, I suppose, but I find it better to do it. So I'm using my super tack glue and just applying glue to the edges and sticking that page down. Then I'll lift those 2 pages up and repeat the process with the next page, and then do that over and over again. Now it's most important probably to stick the first couple of pages down quite well on the edges. The rest of them you just need a light bit of glue here and there really. So now these are some of the leftover pages that we cut out of all of our windows, and I want to use those to do some stamping on. They're quite thin pages, so I'm going to stick 3 of them together to make a nice thick page. So I'm using my super tack glue for everything today. I've just put it into my little squeeze bottle to make it easier for me to manage. So I'll let these dry really well before I do my stamping and colouring. But it's great to be able to reuse some of the pages that we've taken out. The rest of the pages will probably go into my collage tub to do some collaging with in the future, so they don't get wasted. I sat down last night and finished cutting out the pages and gluing them together, and this is what we end up with. So initially I did have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Initially I had 8 stacks of book pages, but I did end up taking one out because I felt like I didn't need that extra one. I was going to keep it in case I needed to add it to my front cover so that when I closed the book it was still full enough, but it seems that this will be full enough in my book cover. So if I put that in there and I close it up, it's not really lacking too much bulk, so it would still sit and look quite good. So I won't bother with that last group of pages. So as you can see, I did all the pages underneath how I showed you that I did the top. Coming to the end of this, I think my knife started getting a little blunt and it started pulling the pages a bit. That's why when you do start cutting into your group of pages, you want to just go lightly for the first few cuts, and then you can add pressure as you go. And that way you don't pull the pages apart as much and rip them. But if you do rip a page or whatever, don't stress. You can just take off the top couple of pages until you're happy with the page underneath. So I did stick every page, and that does take a bit of time. I didn't worry about getting it all over the place. I think with the first couple of pages, you probably do want to stick quite well to the edges. Other than that, just a bit of glue on all the 4 sides is enough just to hold it together. So, of course, I start with the big one, and then I go down in size of my rectangles. And then coming near the end, I wanted to move in that way a bit just to leave a smaller rectangle at the base there. And then the last block of pages is a thinner one, not that that really matters, which I haven't stuck together, obviously, and they will be stacked on top of each other, and they'll end up like that. And I'm doing this one landscape, so that is the way it's going to sit. I have to keep reminding myself of that. So once that's done, I want to paint the background just to get a bit of colour on before we layer all our focal points. Now, do not stick these pieces together, because this is how I do the layering, and that is I do stick some of my images underneath each layer so they poke out. So you want to keep these apart while you're layering all your bits and pieces, and then we stick it all together after that. I've put all of my layers together, and I'm just drawing a line on each of the tiers so I know where I want my paint to go. As I want to do a sort of ground and sky. So with the bottom tier, I will be painting just the inside window. So I add the layer above that just to draw the rectangle so I know where to put the paint for that. And you can just go in and trim any bits that are a bit rough that you want off. So I've got my watercolours here. I'm definitely no expert with watercolour, but I do find it fun. So I've got the lines that I drew before, and I'm putting a dark brown below that line. In the end, I basically ignore the lines and take it up a bit higher than I wanted to, but that's all right. I found an easier way to figure out where you want it. You work these things out as you go, don't you? I'm also adding a bit of paint on the outside of my frame, which isn't really necessary. It ended up looking a bit dirty actually, but that's all right because it's quite rustic anyway, this project. You do definitely want to get the paint on the inside of your frame though, because you'll see that, obviously. So I've got the second tier there to do. So obviously the first top tier is going to cover some of this up, but I just found it best practice to do most of it anyway. It sort of spreads out, so it goes everywhere. Then I realised if I put the top tier on, I can see where I want the paint to go on the next tier, so it's probably better than doing the line with the pencil. Just doing your first tier and then putting that on top of the second one, and you'll be able to put a little bit of paint there to see where you want it. So here's my second colour that I want to use for the sky. I'm keeping it with simple autumn tones, not doing any blending or anything like that, because I can't paint, firstly. And secondly, I just thought the bits that I put on it will stand out better if I keep it simple as well. Of course, making sure I go on the inside of the frame there and add my colour. I love this project because it is rough and rustic, so it doesn't really matter. Nothing really matters. And, you know, it's an old book that I got from the recycling, so I haven't even bought it. So if I make a mess of it, it really doesn't matter. So this is the bottom block here where I have sketched the rectangle, and I'm just colouring in that rectangle and just outside the line of the rectangle. I also go around the outside of the page because you might see a bit of that under the top tier. So I put all of that aside to dry, and now I want to do some stamping on the book pages that we stuck together. So there's the 3 book pages stuck together, and that's made a lot more sturdy now. And I'm using my black archival ink. I'm purposely using archival ink because that won't run when I use watercolour on these. And I'm stamping some birds and animals, mushrooms, and I did heaps and heaps of leaves. And again, I'm going in with the watercolour and I am just painting these. A great fun project. I do just a couple with you and then I take it all out into the lounge room and watch TV while I did the rest. So there's a paper towel off camera there to the other side, which I use to blot my brush on if it's a bit wet, and when I wash it out, I will blot it on that. I'm getting better with my watercolours, actually. One day I should actually follow some tutorials, but I like having fun with things like that, just trying them out. It takes so long to get used to the feel of the paintbrush and how to mix the colours and that sort of thing. I prefer to just mess around with things like this and figure out what I can and then look up tutorials if need afterwards. Cut some chipboard here. It's not quite the length of the spine, it's just short by about 1 centimetre really. If you look at the cardboard that's already in the spine, it's about the same size as that. And then the width I need to slip in there, making sure that I can still close my book cover. And I'm just using the glue to stick that down. I did put some weight on it until the glue dried to make sure it's in there nicely. Now I'm ripping some of my scrap fabric and I'm going to stick that on top just to make it look a bit neater. It's basically how I'd prepare a journal cover if I'm going to sew through the spine. So I'll just use the glue to stick that down as well. I do make sure to get glue in the edges there, in between the covers and that spine piece. And then when I put the fabric on, I make sure I get a ruler and press the fabric down in those little grooves on the edges there. That'll just help when you're opening and closing, or make sure that the fabric doesn't sort of bubble up and look messy. So I've seen heaps of tunnel books, all different sorts on Pinterest and places like that, but I've seen some people do the most amazing ones with books. Yeah, I'm not that talented to be able to do it like they do, cut out these fancy things on every page, and yeah. So I thought, well, how can I make something like that I can manage? Yeah, and this works good. I love doing this, just using all these random stamps and trying to make some scenery out of it. So I stamped this tree with brown ink. It's a solid stamp, so I thought I would go around it with my black micron pen, just to add lines as if it had been stamped in the black ink like everything else. Added some lines in it like they were knots in the tree and stuff. It was a bit messy actually, but you don't really notice it much. So the mushrooms I painted, they need the white spots on them, so I've grabbed a white gel pen, my Signo pen, and I'm just adding some white spots. It has spots, but they're, you don't really notice them because it's stamped, so I thought it'd look cool to use the gel pen to add those. I go over them twice though to make sure they stand out nice. Then I grab one of my watercolour pens. It's a dual tip watercolour brush marker thing. And I'm just doing some highlights in the leaves here. I thought they needed it, so it's just a bit of a darker colour that I'm doing the stem and the veins with a little bit. You could do this with all your stamped pieces if you wanted to. You could colour the whole lot in with your markers, especially if you don't like to use watercolour paints or you don't have any. You could use anything to colour it in with. Now we're going to start putting it all together by sticking down our bottom tier. That's the one without the window. Nice liberal gluing. Making sure it's sort of flush with that back cover, so that when we stand up they sort of sit nicely on the bottom, and made sure that I could still close my book. And then I'm putting the punches on just to weight it down while it dries for a bit. And then I've just got the next tier there, and I want to use this owl as a focal point at the back of my tunnel. I've got some little leaves there that I've coloured in, and I thought they'll go good at the back because I assume the leaves back there would be smaller than the ones up front. So you put that the next tier up there so that you can see where you want to place these pieces, of course. And I haven't stuck it down yet because you might want to slip bits underneath and that, so I do end up sticking this one down, but the rest I don't stick down until I've got all of my embellishments placed. Now, other than the owl, I didn't have a plan for where I was putting anything. I think the owl and then the fox and tree, I knew where I was going to stick them, but the rest I just figured as I was going. So I stick that next tier down. making sure that it's pretty flush with the other one, that when I close the book the spine's still going to sit flat. Making sure the top and the bottom are flush with each other page wise. So I've got my tree here, and I decide that I will cut out all the little spindly branches there. It fits quite nicely there as well. So I put glue all over it because I didn't think that I don't need glue all over it. Only on the places that are going to sit on that top tier. But it doesn't matter. Might strengthen things up a bit when it dries. I decided I'd use the same sort of leaves and put them on the top of the tree. So of course none of these other tiers are stuck down yet. So it takes a bit of time to figure out where you want to place things. I decided that I would cut the birds off of this branch to stick in the tree. I thought that would look nice like that. But I want to hide his little feet under the leaves, so I've got to figure out how to layer the things so that it works. So don't want to push too hard because you'll bend your stamped pieces. This is why I layered the book page and had 3 of them together. Just makes it that little bit more sturdy. You could of course use cardstock or something if you want as well. You can add foam tape underneath some of the pieces coming up from one of the tiers just to support underneath these bits that stick out. I felt with this it didn't really need it except for one of the owls that I do later on. I'm sticking this cute fox down. It hides the base of the tree there. I decided to use the leaves that I cut the birds off of on the side. You can see I've added some little birds and my mushrooms, and I've put them on different tiers so it gives you that sort of 3D effect. And this is why you keep your tiers separate, so you can lift them up and put the ends of your leaves underneath and you stick them to that tier, and then the other tier sits on top. So I just finished off. I think I put down most of the animals and mushrooms and that, and then I go just stuffing leaves in here and there everywhere where it looks a bit blank. So once you've got all of your embellishment pieces stuck down, it's time to start layering all of the tiers together now. It's fun watching it come together. Nearly stuck that one on upside down, which would have been a disaster. I think I went up too high with my brown paint for the background. I think I meant to stop that a lot lower. So here I've got the double-sided foam tape, and I've just stuck 2 bits of it together and stuck it to the tier underneath my owl, and then sit my owl on that. But the rest seems to hold fine. So now I just repeat the process with all the tiers. Checking that it closes nicely every time I stick one down, and that the edges are all pretty flush with each other. I think this is the top tier going on now. So just weighting them down for a bit. So I decided there was a bit of room up the top and it would be nice to have a label up there. So I'm just cutting out a bit of my scrap fabric and I will layer my little words on top of that. I was going to stamp some words, which may have looked better, but I have so many stickers that I need to get using. So I found that one and thought it would go nicely up there. I did use glue on top of the sticker just to make sure it stays down. Put it on the fabric and then stick that down. It's a nice finishing touch. Now I did place one of my leaves in the wrong spot and it covered my little bird, so I ripped it up, and in doing so I left some white spaces there, so I just go it back over them with the watercolour, using my crocodile to create a hole in the front cover and just adding an eyelet to that. Sticking just some scrap fabric that I have. It's already it's not quite long enough, but I made do with it anyway. It's just a nice strip. Tying a knot in the end so it doesn't pull back through the eyelet. Then I can just wrap it around to close off my tunnel book. So this is my tunnel book all finished. So you can see where I left out the group of pages. There is a bit of a gap there. I could, if I wanted to, add them on the front cover and then embellish them, which I might in the future, not sure. But I thought that was enough for this video. Now you can see the pages stick out a little bit there. If I push on the cover that way a bit, it's pretty well right. It's because I did loosen the cover and take it off completely, so you have to sort of pull it over to have it flush with the pages. Also because I did add the chipboard and push the spine in. If I hadn't done that, there's more room for the pages to sit back a bit, so just be wary of that. Could have cut my pages down a bit if I wanted to, but yeah, if I press down on it like that, they sit pretty well flush. So I did just wrap this bit of fabric around as a closure. And then you could, of course, embellish the cover if you want, and embellish this side, which is another thing I might do, although if you're displaying it, if you've got it near a wall or something, you're not going to see that anyway. Now my idea was to have it so it stands up with this part, which if you put it sort of like straight, you can make it stand up but it didn't work as good as I had hoped, probably because I left a gap between the spine and the cover so it closes nicely. But then it's not firm enough to hold it up. But that is all right. Could always rig something up to make that work, or even put a little stand thing that you could flip around that would hold it up. So I haven't covered that at all. You could cover around your book if you wanted to. I did add some colour on it so it wasn't just all white and that. But I kind of like the look of all the pages there. A bit rustic. But there's lots you could do to neaten it up. You could do a sort of frame around it or put it in a frame. That would look cool as well. But yeah, I did want to try it landscape style and with the book block taken out and just see how different it was. So that is the finished tunnel book. It's a bit of a hot mess, but I love it. It's great fun. It's a great way to use up the stamps that you have sitting around and, you know, revisit them and find some in your stash. I used a lot of different stamp sets to make this. Just pulled something out of this and that to put it together. And that is great fun to be able to do that. Yeah, very busy. Sometimes less is more, but I did want it to look like there were lots of leaves around and the owl was hiding in the leaves and that. I did initially want a nice big squirrel for the back, but I could only find one squirrel stamp in my stash and it's about this big. So, yeah, but I love the fox. And I've got the 2 owls and then these little bluebirds and... yeah, lots of fun. So I did make one of these previously a year or 2 ago, and that was this one. So quite an old book. And when you open this up, I didn't take the actual signature out when I made this one. So I've got the start page there. Open that up, and there's the one I did last time. So that can just stand up like that on a shelf. And I did it in more of a sort of summery theme, and you can see how less is more here. There's not a lot in it, so everything stands out quite nicely, and that was a lot of fun to make that as well. I did find it hard. You can see this group of pages sticks out a lot more than the back ones and that's why I thought it might be easier to take the whole book block out and separate the pieces to do the layering, because I had to do all the cutting and the gluing of the pages and assembling of it, you know, with the signature in the book. But they were both fun to make, so it was a good experiment. So the glue that I used for the whole project was the Super Tack glue from Helmar, and it worked really well for everything that I used it for, so that was great. I did put it into a little applicator bottle, mainly because I do have a hand injury. So I do find the bigger bottles and that a little harder to manage. So I find it a lot easier to use the smaller squeezy bottles. Also, I waste a lot of glue when I use the bigger bottles, and I find that I am better at making it last when I use it in something a bit smaller. So that is my project for July for the Helmar creative team. The link to Helmar is down below if you'd like to go and check out their range of glue. They've got heaps of different ones that you can use. I'll probably use their matte sealer as well to give this a spray, and the other one because I never sprayed that, just to protect it nicely. And then if I display it, it'll be a bit easier to keep the dust off and everything. And hopefully that will keep the colours all nice as well. So I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you give it a go. It does take a bit of time to cut the pages and glue them and do your stamping and the watercolouring, but it's a fun project to do if you're sitting out watching TV, that sort of thing. Heaps of fun once you put it together and see how it comes together. It's amazing that all these different little bits and pieces go together to make a nice scene like that. So take care of yourselves, be good, and I will see you again soon. Bye.